Welcome to the Tom Nelson podcast. My guest today is Jack McPherrin.
I work for the Heartland Institute. I'm a research fellow within the Socialism Research Center and also Heartland's research editor. I live here in Chicago. I grew up here, lived here my whole life. I've been working in this industry for about 3 years. Before that, I worked in commercial real estate. So a bit of a career switch, but it's going well so far.
Okay. And as I was saying earlier, I spent the last 24 hours listening to you speak quite a bit. It's fascinating stuff, this ESG stuff. I have not been very far down the rabbit hole, but where should we start here? Do you want to talk to us about what ESG is at the very top here?
Sure. And I just wrote a very comprehensive policy paper that was published in May. That was sent to a number of state and federal legislators. And in that paper, we've got a pretty good definition of what it is here. So at its core, ESG is a social credit scoring system that ideologically aligned elites and subservient bureaucratic and regulatory authorities have been developing to reset the global financial system to their advantage and fundamentally transform society in the process. And ESG works by altering traditional frameworks of evaluating businesses and assessing investment risk. Rather than determining the creditworthiness and value of a business or industry based upon objective measures like return on investment, consumer demand, and other material performance measures, ESG's architects are trying to judge entities based upon subjective and difficult to quantify social and environmental goals, which typically have little or nothing to do with business success in the marketplace. Entities deemed unworthy with bad scores, such as those involved in hydrocarbon extraction, firearm manufacturing, or even agricultural production, are being frozen out of financial markets, while those that receive high scores benefit from massive investment flows and just basic access to financial services, which many folks are not receiving anymore. So that's the basic picture.
I was pleased to see back in January, Elon Musk tweeted that the S in ESG stands for satanic. I think.
Sure. Yeah, I could see where he's coming from.
So, is there a story about ESG and Tesla that somehow they got kicked out of an index because they decided they didn't like Elon? What was the deal there?
Yeah, I off the top of my head, I can't really remember the details too well, but Tesla was not given a particularly good ESG rating, which Elon thought was interesting considering their commitment to electric vehicles, which is a huge component of the E in ESG in terms of reducing emissions and going with just battery powered vehicles. And I don't know how that played out. There's a bunch of different ESG scoring systems, but he was displeased with the result for sure.
Right. There's just a huge yawning gap, right, between the ESG as presented to the public as it's being all about making the environment better and equality, et cetera. And what it really is, it's just a smoke screen for control, isn't it?
It is. It's the implications of ESG are numerous, but there's the financial aspect, and then there's the normative aspect, and the normative aspect is, at least to me, more important. It's a method of centralizing power and control in the hands of a very small group of elites. The world's biggest asset managers, the world's biggest banks, insurance companies, plus, of course, international organizations like the UN, the World Economic Forum, the IMF, the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, and finally, regulatory authorities like the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the Biden administration in general. And it's this immense public-private partnership where power is concentrated not in the hands of the people, but in terms of the people who are trying to govern the way that the rest of us live.
Let's talk about ESG in practice. There's this great story you've had about Bud Brigham that couldn't get a loan. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, let me. I've got it in my. I'll just quote directly from an article that was published by the Daily Caller. But to give the background, Brigham Minerals executive chairman Bud Brigham testified under oath in front of the Texas Senate Committee on State Affairs that Credit Suisse, a major Wall Street bank, refused to offer him a loan unless he publicly supported the bank's climate agenda. Quoting from the Daily Caller, when he, Brigham, reached out to ask why Credit Suisse had failed to respond to his application, Brigham claims a representative at the bank said the bank might not be able to partner with Brigham, allegedly telling him that climate change is real and it's not debatable. Brigham claims he responded that the science is ever evolving, prompting the representative to offer an opportunity to strike a deal, but only if Brigham parroted the bank's climate agenda. How about if I can get you some bullets to tweet? If you can tweet this out, I think there's a good chance we can do this deal, the representative allegedly said. Brigham said he then received an email with the bullet points. And that's just one small microcosm of how all of this works. A lot of times it doesn't even get to that point because a lot of these mid to small sized companies are coerced into doing this because they know that if they don't, they're done. They die in the vine.
Yeah, so it seems like it's all about carrots for being woke in general, and then there's sticks for not being woke, and you got to toe the line or your company might be gone.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better. Yep.
So how about the whole Bud Light thing and ESG and them going woke?
Sure. Yeah, the Bud Light thing, it's difficult to tie directly to ESG, but it's also impossible to ignore how ESG influenced their decision to, for example, hire the transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney to her face was on a Bud Light can, and they did the whole advertising campaign around that. And of course, part of the S in ESG is about woke social policy, and it's hard to think that they didn't make that decision with the hopes of getting more investment and a higher ESG score. Of course, that resulted in a massive backlash, and they have already lost their position as the world's top selling beer. And a lot of other companies have seen the same thing, but that's the general narrative that these companies are trying to toe. It's they risk losing the support of their customers, but if they don't go woke, they're given the stick by the world's largest money people. So
can you explain how this might work for a company like Bud Light or for any company? You actually get a number that there's someone who calculates a number and you can point at this number and this is our ESG score. How does the scoring system work?
Yeah, so I have a whole section in the paper about the metrics. And one of the confusing things about ESG is that there are a number of different ratings companies and a number of different ways of calculating this score. So, for example, one academic report from 2021 aggregating evidence from more than 1,000 studies on ESG performance found that, quote, studies use different scores for different companies by different data providers. Another 2020 study analyzed 6 prominent ESG ratings agencies and found that each of the 6 employ different category scopes, measurements, and weights. Researchers have also found that a rater's subjective view of the firm being examined influenced the rater's assessment. So overall, it's there really isn't a standardized measure. However, that is changing. That there are a lot of efforts right now to create one overall standard. That there's an organization called the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is affiliated heavily with the World Economic Forum, that is attempting to, they call it harmonizing ESG standards into one framework for every company and individual on the planet. But for the sake of this paper that I wrote, and that a lot of people use the system promoted by the World Economic Forum and the International Business Council. And in that framework, there are, 55 different metrics, and they combine qualitative metrics such as material issues impacting stakeholders to quantitative metrics such as total social investment. And under that second category, by the way, that could include investment into, community woke organizations like, Planned Parenthood or Black Lives Matter. So the more money you give to these sort of radical social groups, the better ESG score you get, at least theoretically. Some of the other metrics are, of course, heavily focused on the environment, like impact of greenhouse gas emissions. And the qualifier there is report wherever material along the value chain, scopes 1, 2, and 3, the valued impact of greenhouse gas emissions, disclose the estimate for the societal cost of carbon used and the source or basis for this estimate. There are other metrics such as impact of air pollution, impact of water pollution, impact of solid waste disposal, impact of freshwater consumption. It goes on and on. So that's the basic idea behind these metrics, and it's really important to understand that these metrics in many ways are inherently discriminatory. So of course they give the people controlling these frameworks immense power, because new metrics or entirely new categories could be added to this system whenever it suits the figures involved in the creation and distribution of ESG scores. And these changes are made without any democratic processes. Basically, regarding groups of people, the metrics themselves are discriminatory because, for one example, if certain corporate boardrooms consist of qualified and capable individuals who have been subjectively determined to belong to an undesirable social group, the company could be downgraded in its ESG score because of its non-diverse ethnic composition based on skin color or based on gender or a yet to be determined different factor. So, and the same thing goes for employees of the company. One of the metrics is based on percentage of what is it here? Yeah, diversity and inclusion. Percentage of employees per employee category by age group, gender, and other indicators of diversity, e.g. ethnicity. Meaning that if a company has too many Hispanics compared to Asians, they could be downgraded in their ESG score. And of course, who knows what the right percentage of different ethnic groups is. It's absurd.
I mean, how is this in any way legal to discriminate on the basis of race and gender and all these things?
It isn't. And that's why we're seeing a lot of pushback and new policies being proposed that would codify fair access to financial services. And the Trump administration actually attempted to do that in the final days of his presidency. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency introduced a new rule that would allow companies and individuals to receive the same access to financial services regardless of what groups they belong in, and their creditworthiness would be determined based on individual characteristics rather than group characteristics, right? And the Biden administration within 2 weeks revoked the rule. That being said, that rule has provided the basis for a lot of state level legislation, which has been going strong over the past couple of years. And Florida is probably the most prominent example of a state that has institutionalized the fair access to financial services language.
So have you worked with legislators around the country to bring them up to speed on what's happening here and helping them to fight back?
Yeah, myself and my team at Heartland has been working heavily with legislators in a number of states. And federally, obviously, due to our current partisan makeup and due to the fact that President Biden is sitting at the ready with his veto pen, we can't make a ton of progress, but we have seen a lot more focus at the federal level, which is really encouraging as well.
Right. And you're particularly happy with what's going on in Florida, right? With the pushback against ESG?
Absolutely, yeah. Because it includes policies that, there's three major policies that we recommend that states implement. And one is based around pension fund divestment. So withdrawing large state, municipal, public employee pension funds from investment fund management companies, pushing ESG is is a big factor. And then the second is revolves around state contract prohibitions, prohibiting the state from contracting with entities that boycott certain industries like hydrocarbon extraction, firearms manufacturing, whatever it is. And then the third, in my opinion, is the most important, which is the anti-discrimination regulations, which is based around the fair access to financial services principle that we've already discussed. And Florida implemented all three in very comprehensive legislation that I believe was passed in May of this year. And hopefully other states take Florida's lead, because Governor DeSantis has been very outspoken in his support for these anti-ESG measures, and has actually led a coalition of states that are seeking to do similar things.
So it does seem like this could be a major factor for companies looking to relocate, that they might go to states where the business climate isn't totally crazy.
I would think so. Yes.
Okay. Stepping back, I wanted to understand who can get an ESG score. It could be just a single person, or it could be a company or a state or a country.
So it could be a sovereign country like Sri Lanka, for example, which we can get into a little bit later.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
It could be a state, like Utah, for example, was given a bad ESG score by, I think it was S&P last year, and they were very unhappy with that assessment. Most commonly, ESG scores are given to large and medium-sized companies, although very small companies have begun getting them as well. And even individuals. This is starting to happen too with individuals. And that is extremely concerning. If one's individual carbon footprint can be tracked, and then that person can be prevented from getting access to, opening a bank account based on the fact that they ate too much meat in 1 week, that's how we descend into totalitarianism, right?
So this could be tied into the whole CBDC thing then, where they can track you, and then on an individual basis, they could say you bought too much gas this week, no more for you till next week, that type of thing?
Absolutely. And if we do eventually end up with a Federal Reserve controlled and issued central bank digital currency, it would almost certainly be integrated with ESG to govern. And this is an entirely different topic that I will probably be writing a separate policy paper about. But it would be programmable so that you could, only spend a certain amount of your money on gasoline, only a certain amount of your money on meat, can only travel certain distances by of course, restricting your energy supply, can force you to eat plant-based meat instead of meat from cows, for example, because cows emit too many pollutants, according to these people. So the integration of central bank digital currencies with ESG is truly the end of the line. So both need to be opposed with every fiber of our being.
They also could separately just put an expiration date on some or all of your money, right? That you have to spend it to encourage.
Absolutely. Yeah. They could do anything they want. That's the whole point. That they could give you a monthly stipend, and then at the end of the month your bank account goes to zero again. The whole point is that they have complete control over your money, and you have no power.
Just as an aside, what do you think of people going to Bitcoin to try to get around this?
Yeah, there is some attractiveness to crypto as an alternative, and that's why a lot of the people that promote CBDCs are demonizing the crypto industry, because a lot of crypto is based on decentralized ledgers, whereas CBDCs are based on a centralized hub. And I'm no expert on cryptocurrencies. I just know the very basics of the differences between crypto and CBDCs, and they're basically polar opposites. CBDCs are designed to be controllable from one source. Cryptos are designed to be decentralized with a bunch of different hubs that make people anonymous as well. Whereas with a CBDC, everybody would be tracked with a digital ID.
So a major reason that people use to push back against Bitcoin is that it takes a lot of electricity to mine it, et cetera, and that's going to cause bad weather. Do you think that's a sincere thing, that they really believe it's causing bad weather, or you think they have other reasons for opposing it?
That plays into the whole thing that I was just talking about. It's a smokescreen for them to demonize crypto. And yeah, I'm sure that it does use up a little bit more energy than maybe certain people would like, but that's not the primary reason for their demonization of crypto. No.
So you mentioned Sri Lanka. Do you want to talk in detail about what happened there? I think that's fascinating.
Sure. Yeah. So let me pull up the details here. But let's see. Yeah. So, for example, due to international pressure to embrace ESG, the Sri Lankan government imposed a regulatory ban on chemical fertilizers in April 2021 and signed on to a green finance taxonomy with the International Finance Corporation in May of 2022 that committed the country's farmers to using organic fertilizers, which are substantially less effective than and efficient than chemical fertilizers. As a result, crop production was cut basically in half in less than a year. And this resulted in complete societal upheaval and riots in the streets that toppled the Sri Lankan government, with these harmful effects still being felt by the Sri Lankan people today. I mean, they can barely afford to eat and feed, they can barely feed themselves. And this is all based on these extremely short-sighted ESG measures. And this is not the only example of this occurring. Agriculture has been one of the industries that ESG's architects are focusing on the most these days. And with what we saw in the Netherlands, with the Dutch farmers rising up in protest to the regulatory policies that were strangling their ability to farm, and even in Canada and the United States, a lot of policies are being proposed and enacted to limit the ability for a farmer to do whatever he wants on his own land. And it's stifling food production at a time when the world needs food.
So wasn't there bragging from Sri Lanka right before everything went down the tubes that they had such a high ESG score?
Yeah.
And do you think that's a big factor then in the pushback, or that Larry Fink of BlackRock said he stopped using the term because it's been weaponized? Wasn't Sri Lanka a big part of that or not?
I think it might have been. I think the bigger reason why Larry Fink has decided to not use ESG is because there has been so much pushback from conservative states, from red states, that he didn't want ESG to become a buzzword. One of the biggest, at least in my point of view, one of the biggest reasons that ESG flew relatively under the radar until very recently, it was intentional. These oligarchs running our entire, banking and financial system, and then their agents within regulatory bodies, they wanted to institutionalize this system before people could catch on. And fortunately, people did start catching on, and ESG became this lightning rod political issue. And I mean, now even Republican, 2024 potential candidates are talking about it. DeSantis is talking about it. Vivek Ramaswamy is talking about it a lot. I think he's written multiple books pretty much entirely about ESG. Donald Trump is talking about it. Mike Pence is talking about it. There are very few people not talking about ESG, especially on the right side of the aisle. And that public scrutiny, I think, is forcing ESG's biggest architects like Larry Fink to back away a little bit. And there are also, I believe, internal pressures, within BlackRock and BlackRock's clients. I mean, ESG is losing them money. And at a certain point, pressure is going to be put on management to stop losing money for these ideological causes.
So is he actually backing away, or is he just trying to do it using a different name for it? And if so, what is this new name?
We don't know what the new name is, but I would imagine that there will be one. And I think that, sustainable investment is a synonymous term to ESG, and we'll see a lot more uh, nice sounding names for ESG get used a lot more than ESG, I think, in the future, and it's going to be important to drill down into precisely what those terms mean.
So there's this whole idea in the Netherlands, maybe we're going to get rid of 20% of the cows, things like that. Is that related to ESG, that part of it, or no?
Yes, it is. I mean, I don't know if ESG was referenced in the actual regulations, but one of the biggest pieces of ESG, if not the biggest piece, is the emissions reductions inherent within the E metrics, and apparently, according to ESG's overlords, cows and agriculture in general are one of the largest emitters of carbon dioxide in terms of industries.
And how about schemes like producing fake meat? Is there some, you get a bonus somehow, you get a better ESG score if your company produces fake meat? Or a separate thing here is just recently they're talking about Bill Gates is related to this scheme where they're going to cut down 70 million trees and bury them. You get some sort of ESG bonus for doing crazy stuff like that too?
That I could not give you an answer on, but it would not surprise me if that were the case.
Okay, let's see. Oh, you said on other podcasts, you call this freedom versus slavery. I guess
it is.
what we...
Yeah, I mean, like we were talking about with the CBDC ESG integration. I mean, we don't necessarily have a true free market economy right now. I mean, we've been lapsing into cronyism for a long time, but ESG takes it to a whole nother level where it destroys any semblance of free markets by concentrating. It's corporatism. It is what it is. It's corporate interests working on behalf of a international body of intergovernmental authorities and the most powerful financial institutions in the world to promote certain objectives. It destroys national sovereignties. It destroys democratic institutions, and it destroys individual rights via the discriminatory nature of many of these policies.
Right, and you work on is it the site called Stopping Socialism, or you have
our research center's site is called stoppingsocialism.com, but we have a specific page on heartland.org's website, heartland.org/ESG, where a lot of our work, all of our work on ESG has been published, including the policy paper that I wrote, which is at the very top of that page. Yeah, any information you could ever want about ESG can likely be found on that page.
Yeah, so in the show notes already, I'm looking at it right now for this podcast, I have a whole bunch of links that are your links. There's one called the1818.com that's also your site, right?
The 1818 actually is undergoing renovations. We're going to be transforming that into a new site focused for legislators, I believe, although that hasn't been quite finalized yet. So consider that one defunct for the time being.
Okay. All right. But if people, legislators, et cetera, want to help from you understanding this, they can contact you, right? They can go to your website and either email you or call you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Feel free to email me or anybody else at Heartland. We also have an ESG centric email address called stopesg@heartland.org, which we monitor closely. So absolutely, any and all inquiries about this topic and any other topic are welcome.
Okay. Elsewhere, you've talked about a definition of fascism. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. There are a lot of different perspectives on what fascism is, but at its core, fascism, at least as espoused by Benito Mussolini in fascist Italy, is using the power of corporations to advance the interests of the state and combining state power and corporate power to strengthen the state. And lately, fascism is, of course, it's being used to talk about any type of perceived authoritarianism, but what it really is government and corporate and economic interests working along with social institutions to work in concert and do whatever they want, in the interest of those in power. And that's what we're seeing with ESG. Although it's arguably more of an international corporatism than a national corporatism, because as I mentioned, a lot of the power behind ESG is coming from international organizations, and it erodes national sovereignty. So it's being this type of international fascism or international corporatism is being used to further the objectives of these international oligarchs and powerful political entities.
And where does stakeholder capitalism fit in here?
Yeah, so stakeholder capitalism has been developed as a term that runs counter to traditional shareholder capitalism. Shareholder capitalism is what Milton Friedman famously introduced back in the early 70s, in which he posited that corporations should only work in the interests of their shareholders and maximize profits and returns. And stakeholder capitalism essentially posits that corporations need to work on behalf of stakeholders. And of course, the term stakeholders is very subjective, and it can refer to the employees of the company. It can refer to the corporate executives who manage the company. It can refer to the community around which the company operates. It can refer to the environment, which of course doesn't have a voice, but other people proxy on behalf of the environment, apparently. And it's essentially a catch-all phrase to directly subvert the shareholder capitalism doctrine. And most importantly, stakeholder capitalism is not capitalism. It's more, and nor is it really socialism. It's corporatism, aka fascism, using pretty socialist words to try and make it seem palatable to the general public.
Yeah, you mentioned that people are making pension investing decisions based on woke reasons rather than real solid financial reasons. Is there going to be some sort of huge pushback from people whose pensions have been blown by their money being put into woke causes, and then their money's gone?
Yeah, I think there already is to a large degree. Congress attempted to pass a law earlier this year that would bar planned fiduciaries from investing based on woke or progressive or political, ideological, whatever reasons, and force them to only consider material pecuniary factors. And of course, Biden vetoed it, and that effort died. So, and that's why I say that with Biden in the White House, any sort of federal legislation, even if it does gain some bipartisan support, which the legislation that I was just talking about did, I believe 2 Democratic senators co-sponsored that legislation, or signed onto it. I don't think they co-sponsored it, but they signed onto it. Even if we do get a handful of Democratic senators and congressmen to sign on, Biden's going to veto it because he's part of this whole agenda.
Whose work do you like besides your own? Who else do you think is doing good work, or who is an influence on you in learning more about this and understanding this better?
That's a good question. I would need to think about that a lot, because I have a lot of different people that I've followed, but my partners, Justin Haskins and Donald Kendall, worked with Glenn Beck to produce a few books called The Great Reset. And then the sequel, which just came out, called Dark Future, which focused heavily on ESG. And that was a tremendous influence on me. I also recommend following the work of Vivek Ramaswamy, who has talked extensively about all of this and written extensively about it in various publications outside of just his own books. And that would be a good jumping off point for all of this.
All right. And you are not active personally on social media, right? But you're writing papers?
Correct. Yes. I write op-eds, papers, edit papers, manage various websites, but no social media for me.
Any books in your future? Are you writing any books?
Well, my another one of my team members and I are finishing up a short book right now called Socialism at a Glance that I can give more updates on when we've completed it. But that's going to be aimed towards educating mainly high school students about the evils of socialism, especially as we see socialism gaining more traction in politics in America and elsewhere.
All right. Just before we talked, I sent you a link from James Lindsay about woke is Marxism. Do you have any thoughts on that yet or no?
I don't yet. I still need to look at that. I know that James Lindsay has, I believe he just came out with a book about it. And just very off the top of my head, yes, there are many elements of Marxism within wokeism is in many ways Marxism, but I would need to draw some coherent thoughts together to give you a better answer.
Do you have any other anecdotes like the Bud Brigham one or any other ones, real life stories of people who have ran into problems because of this crazy ESG stuff? Anything you have, I'd love to hear. Sure.
Well, you know about the ExxonMobil engine number one. It's hard to find individual people, but it's easy to find companies and industries because they haven't quite resorted to lasering in on individuals as much yet, although I'm sure that is coming. But for example, with ExxonMobil, let me just find this real quick. Yeah, so one of the largest elements of this international cabal that is behind ESG are the world's largest asset management firms, BlackRock, State Street Global Advisors, and Vanguard, collectively known as the Big Three. And between the three of them, at least at the time of the publication of this paper a few months ago, they controlled at least $22 trillion in assets under management between them, as well as an average of 20% of the shareholder votes in the S&P 500. And they wield this power ruthlessly. For example, BlackRock organized a takeover of ExxonMobil's board of directors in 2021, replacing 3 of its 12 directors with climate activists committed to moving Exxon away from hydrocarbon-based energy production and sales, which, of course, goes against their entire business model. And less public examples of that are legion, I'm sure. A lot of them don't get publicized because it would probably produce a little bit of a public uproar. And then for another example, and this is very interesting, and I had mentioned the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency earlier in the context of the Trump administration's rule that would have institutionalized fair access to financial services. But in November 2020, the OCC found that financial institutions devoted to ESG practices had, over nearly a 2-year period, attempted to debank and or deny services entirely to numerous industrial sectors, including healthcare and social service providers, family planning organizations, independent ATMs, firearm manufacturers, the agricultural industry, and multiple major energy industries that are vital to U.S. infrastructure and power generation, such as coal mining, coal-fired electricity generation, and oil exploration. And then things like that happen all the time now. I mean, I have another example here. The banking industry in particular is at the forefront of this, according to a 2021 report from Morningstar and their pro ESG research arm, Sustainalytics. Most major banks screen, and this is a quote from the report, most major banks screen their lending practices against specific ESG risks, and many embrace negative or positive screening for potential corporate lending transactions or private finance transactions. Negative screening and norm-based screening involve the exclusion or avoidance of transactions not aligned with environmental, social, and ethical standards. So this is systemic. This is not isolated. This is all over the place. And one of the biggest bankers and the head of Bank of America, the chairman and CEO of Bank of America, Brian Moynihan, is at the center of all of this ESG stuff, apart from perhaps Larry Fink and World Economic Forum Chairman Klaus Schwab. He is probably the most powerful person behind this. And during during the World Economics Forum's 2022 annual summit, he committed to using the entire financial portfolio of Bank of America, including the deposits of individual account holders, to advance ESG. I quote, 200,000 people, a $3 trillion balance sheet, $60 billion in expenses. You start aiming that gun, you take that across all these companies, it is huge. The companies delivering on the metrics will get more capital. The ones that won't will get less. That's about as simple as it gets right there. That's how these people operate.
Didn't you have a story about a doctor getting debanked because they didn't like what he was saying about
I don't think that I've written personally about what happened, but Dr. Joseph Marola in Florida was recently debanked, and not just him, but his entire company, and I believe his family was debanked from JP Morgan for no reason at all. But the speculation is that it was due to his COVID-19 vaccine skepticism. And he actually, from what I understand, has officially sued JP Morgan via the recently enacted Florida legislation that DeSantis and the legislator ushered through in May that gives fair access to financial services for everybody. So that's going to present a very major test run of the new law and whether it holds up in court.
So what was going on, getting back to Exxon and BlackRock? BlackRock had a lot of money in Exxon, and what do they get out of it if they replace the 3 of the board members with the climate alarmists? Why would they do that?
That's a good question. They probably because they are heavily invested in green energy and the entire transition to green energy and away from fossil fuels. I don't have any specific numbers on that, but they've been heavily involved. They're very invested in, China and China's production of a lot of these EV batteries. And I would imagine that forcing these companies to shift away from entrenched practices into the practices that BlackRock and these companies are invested in makes them more money, gives them more power. It's that simple.
What do you think is going on with Berkshire Hathaway and ESG? Because I think Warren Buffett has kind of spoken out against ESG, but they're making a lot of money off of wind turbines. And Charlie Munger has a lot of positive things to say about China. And also, they required a vax pass to get into their meeting a year ago. What do you think? I guess, is there some division in there about are they for it or against it?
There might be. I don't know too much about Berkshire Hathaway's commitments for or against ESG. I have read similar things to what you mentioned about their their support for ESG. But I would imagine, just based on private conversations I've had with folks that are high up in banks and other financial organizations, that there are a lot of people that don't like the precedent that ESG is setting and don't like being bossed around, but they have to toe the line publicly. But in private, they are very unhappy with this sequence of events and what they see as coercion, and that's what it is. It's coercive at its roots, and no company likes being told what to do, especially if it negatively impacts their bottom line.
What do you think, looking ahead the next year or two, what do you anticipate happening? You think there's going to be big battles over this, and are the good guys going to win, or what do you think?
I would imagine we'll see, just like we did this year, a lot of activity within states, and we will see some success. I have a map in this paper where it's called the Anti-ESG Action Map. Anti-ESG policy has already been enacted in Florida, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Texas, North Dakota, and Utah. there is going to be, according to our government relations experts who do direct outreach to legislators, there is anti-ESG policy that will soon be enacted, as in within the next legislative session in 2024, potentially within New Hampshire, Iowa, Nebraska, Idaho, and Montana. And then there's been ESG or anti-ESG policy proposed in many other states, and it's either stalled in committee or it's just on hold until the next legislative session. Of course, state legislative sessions only last a few months, and so it's hard to educate legislators about an issue and then have them follow up on that issue in such a short amount of time. So we've been doing a lot of outreach in preparation for the 2024 sessions.
Very good. All right. Anything else you'd like to cover, or anything else I should have asked that I didn't ask yet before we wrap up?
No, I think we were pretty comprehensive. I think we covered a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. All right. We will wrap up then. Thank you very much, Jack McPherrin, and I hope to have you on again. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks, Tom. Me too.
All right.
Bye.
Goodbye.